I'm Jim Stone. I was master of Alexandria-Washington Lodge in 1976. The master before me was Donald Maynard Roby, the past Grand Master. But Don has been quite ill for some time. So I'm sort of the de facto senior past master. My background before Masonry, I was born in Newport News, Virginia, and 8 years old moved to Norfolk, Virginia, and I used to say I was from Norfolk, but I've been in Alexandria, Fairfax area longer than I ever lived in Norfolk. I left down there when I was 28. We was working for the Virginia Department of Transportation and got moved up into the country, and then I got moved to Fairfax area. And worked through that and retired from the Department of Transportation. As a kid, I read God is My Co-Pilot, and that did it. I decided I had to fly airplanes. And I've been doing it since then. I've been flying for 50 years now. I teach flying, and to cut my costs down, I learned to be an aircraft mechanic too, and so I did a little of each. I was originally in line, would have been master in 1977, but we had a gentleman, the junior deacon, dropped out of line for medical reasons, and so everybody had to move up one, which upset Donald Roby tremendously, because Don is an organizer. If you've met him before, he's quite an organizer, and he had plans galore for 1976, the bicentennial year. And then all of a sudden he gets bumped to 1975, and I got 1976. So there was a lot of ceremonies, a lot of meetings. We had visiting lodges. Every Saturday, just about during the summertime, there was a visiting lodge that would come up, not visiting us, but to visit the memorial and use this lodge room for a degree. So they would always let the master of this lodge know that somebody was coming, and we would have to be here as the welcoming committee while they were here. And so you attended lodges from every Grand Lodge practically during the summertime, and did that. And then we had to make plans for the bicentennial, and that got kind of interesting. I was concerned. I wanted something different. So when it came time for the memorial on the December the 14th at Mount Vernon, I wanted something different. So I sent a letter to the Chief of Naval Operations and explained to him that this was the bicentennial year and everybody was doing things for the bicentennial. And I had been raised in a Navy town, but I didn't see the Navy doing anything. And I had read that in the old days, up until the Second World War, that it was customary that ships coming up the Potomac River, as they came to Mount Vernon, they would stop and fire a 21-gun salute and then continue on, excuse me, and would then continue on to the Washington Navy Yard. And I thought they'd stop doing that because of the people getting upset at hearing cannon fire during the war. So I got a letter back from the Chief of Naval Operations that he thought that was an excellent idea, that he was passing it on to the 5th Naval District. Well, I started making my plans, and some of the brethren says, well, you don't know you're going to get it. I said, no. I said, well, the Chief of Naval Operations says, I think it's an excellent idea. You don't have to worry about it. And so they went and had a gun mount. They had a signal gun mount put on a ship that normally didn't have a gun mount. The USS Kittiwake, it's a submarine rescue ship, and they brought that up. So we had the ceremony at Mount Vernon, when they had the prayer. As soon as they had the prayer, there was a chief petty officer with a radio standing there. I looked over at the chief petty officer and nodded, and we had the 21-gun salute, which they had phone calls coming from all over the place. What in the world was that, So that was kind of a highlight, something different. Every master has something that he remembers that was unique in his year, and that was my winning operation that I thought. During my year, we had visiting lodges come in. We had the group from Philadelphia came down, always came down. The William L. Elkins Lodge, number 646 out of Philadelphia. They came down for everything we had. And we would make arrangements so whenever we had a function, we'd have a hospitality room at the hotel where they were staying. And we'd just sit up there until the wee hours of the morning and just had a great time. Great bunch of brethren. And then we'd go up, they'd come down for Washington's birthday, for the Memorial Day for his death. We'd go up there for their ladies' night. That was always easy. It was the weekend of the Kentucky Derby, so that made it easy to remember. And then we had visits. My year, the group from Beverly, Massachusetts came down, Beverly Lodge. Beverly Lodge doesn't have a number. They have no numbers in Massachusetts. So Beverly Lodge came down and we had them have a dinner for them, and then we had the ladies' night. Just had a great time. And that's something you made memories with people. I just got to notice that the brother that was the master in the same year I was, that when you went up as an officer, you stayed with the equivalent officer of that lodge. So you saw them every 2 years. And so you got to know the person that was going to be master when you were master. And Dan Hall, he just went to a hospice now. He got a new, kind of just sad to hear. He's a great guy. And I wrote him a letter and pointed out that my wife and I still talk about the dinner we had that night. I said, anytime you can have a dinner and 50 years later you're still talking about it. You know, it was something to see. So that was a group from England. They sent people over during the year. There was no special visit that year, but we had people from England coming to visit. That was a great thing that I liked, was all the different lodges meeting with us and joining in. It was a real brotherhood. One of the brethren coming down from Beverly had a heart attack and had open heart surgery. And he wanted to come down, but the doctor said they didn't think so. They'd have to see. So what we did, like the person that was master when I was master, he stayed with us. And you know, as I said, your officer stayed with you, so you got to know him. We needed a place, and the other brethren stayed with other members of the lodge. Well, it was a couples, but they had this one brother that had the heart problem. His wife wouldn't be coming. He'd be coming by himself. And so we needed a single place for a single. And Jackie Nelson Helms was the junior deacon. And Jackie said he could take him. Jackie was single. He had a place up in Hunting Towers. So we had all the functions in the meeting, and the dinners, and the hospitality room to the wee hours, and broke up. Well, the next morning, Sunday morning, they came down by bus. So the buses were all going to be heading back to Beverly. And we had to bring our guests to the memorial, put them on the bus. So everybody got there like a half hour early. They got all the buses loaded, and they're doing the check off, and they were missing one person. That was the brother that had been so ill that had come down. And then they were beginning to get worried that there was something had happened to him. We're waiting, and all of a sudden we hear tires squealing. And it was Jackie Nelson Helms driving his car up the curved driveway down up to the temple. Pulled up, opened the door, ran around the side, and opened the passenger's door, and the brother got out. Jackie and this brother were still wearing tuxedos from the night before. We'd had the function for the lodge. We'd go into the hospitality room, and when everybody else went home, Jackie took him over to D.C., to some bar in D.C. that he knew about, and they stayed there till that bar was closed. Then they went to a private club somewhere over in Maryland and stayed there till like 6 o'clock in the morning, and then drove down here. And the old guy was still in a tuxedo. And Dan told me that when he got on the bus, they said for the first hour, all that man did was talk about what a great time he had. And then they said he slept the rest of the way to Boston. And he died several months later, but they said that was the highlight of his life. Well, after my year, I was active in the lodge. I always made it a point to sit in the northwest corner of the lodge. Northeast, excuse me. And because all the past masters, the majority of them sat over there in what we call the Amen corner next to the secretary. And I said, I'm not going to be a part of the Amen group. I'll sit over at the side and enjoy lodge. And if anybody's got a question, I'll answer it. But otherwise, I'm enjoying myself. And I did that, but then as I got towards retirement, I opened a business up in Manassas. And the business in Manassas, I didn't finish up till like 6 or 7 o'clock every night, so I never could make it to lodge. I made it to ladies' night, things like that, installations and stuff, but didn't get to attend lodge meetings. And then I started hearing bad things about the lodge. The lodge was having problems. And even to the point I was down in Tappahannock, Virginia on an aviation job. And I got talking to one of the people down there who was active in a lodge, and I asked him about had he heard anything. And he said yes. He said the Alexandria-Washington Lodge was starting to get a reputation of being standoffish. And that upset me. And I came back and I started calling around asking about it. Well, right about that time is when we had the problem and the Grand Master came for the charter. Shortly thereafter, I got a call from Mike Bible and Mark Underwood telling me that they were having the meeting where the charter was coming back and that Mike would be taking Worshipful Master and Mark would take Senior Warden and Jack would take Secretary. And they wanted to know could I be there. They were trying to get as many people as they could, so they got a lot of past masters that showed up that night, ones we hadn't seen in years, one of them being me. And since that time, I told Mike and Mark that I'd support them. And I don't think I've missed a meeting since then. Might have missed a call meeting or something, but I'd make it to every meeting if I'm in town. And if I thoroughly enjoyed it, it's good to be back. We do hear about George Washington when we come to Alexandria-Washington Lodge. Going down to Mount Vernon and standing by the tomb and thinking about where you are. As a master, when you step into the tomb to put the wreath down, it's quite an emotional moment. Reading the books, the histories, the biographies, hearing the speakers come and talk about Washington. I was highly impressed with the copy. If you go down to the National Sojourners, they've got the paper with his rules of civility. To read the rules of civility, that he copied those down. And it was quite the man. And you read more, as years go by, you keep reading things about Washington. I understand that, I hear now that Washington actually had the troops at Yorktown inoculated. This was unheard of, but he'd had smallpox as a child, and the use of cowpox against smallpox had come out, and he had the troops inoculated. They believe that's why so many of them survived the winter. And it's just everything you read was good. More recently, talking to the Brother Nicola, Worshipful Nicola, he said when he was a child, he said, over in Europe, he said, the United States, under the Russian control, the United States was bad people. They said a lot of bad things about the people. He said, but you never heard anybody say anything bad about Washington. They couldn't find anything to say bad about Washington. So that has to infect your life if you listen to just by osmosis. You sit there and hear it, it's going to affect your life. I think that one of the things that have impacted me is in my business when I was working. I had somebody come up to me and said that, all the problems they've had in working with different businesses, they said, one thing I know is you never lied to me. And I think that's part of Washington. The thing that stands out about Alexandria-Washington to me is the relationship with the brethren. This is a lodge that we have a lot of active brethren that come in. I know there are lodges that, they might initiate 25 during the year and they get one out of the 25 that'll keep coming. We have a much better record than that. And the brethren become friends, not just in lodge, but they become friends outside. You take one group, one of the first groups we initiated after Mike Bible took over. One of the first groups we initiated, the three of them, they were making plans to go to Scotland to play golf, that sort of thing. The friendship that's there. When I got into the lodge, when I arrived up here, I moved up, I was 28 years old, had a wife and a 3-year-old child, knew absolutely nobody, moved up to a higher cost of living. In fact, when I went to buy my house, they asked me, did I own or rent where I was? And I said I rented. They said, how much was your monthly rent? I'm making the application for the mortgage. And I said, $65. And the woman looked at me. I was living down in Gordonsville, Virginia, in a 150-year-old house, you know. But that kind of shook the mortgage people. A neighbor across the intersection, I lived on an intersection, and diagonally across from me, he found out I was a Mason. I don't remember how. He was a Russian. He was in his late 70s, and he brought me up to Lodge. And I don't think I ever saw him in Lodge after that. He was just not active. And but when I got into Lodge, I felt like I was at home. And then after about the second meeting, I found out the treasurer of the Lodge, Godfrey Pierpoint Ronaldo, worked for Master in 1950. Godfrey lived 4 doors from me on Luray Avenue. And we became very good friends. And so then when I was going through the chairs and trying to learn the ritual, I'd go up to Godfrey's house and we'd sit in his living room or sit in his backyard and do all the ritual work. After Lodge meetings, I used to laugh and said that Luray Avenue, East Luray Avenue was a very classy neighborhood. Said every Thursday night, you'd find 2 men in tuxedos walking a dog. And we'd come home from the meeting, both of us being tux, and we'd take Godfrey's dog out and walk the dog and talk about Lodge and what was going on. But the family, the idea we had something at the time, and I'd like to see us doing again, for the officers and the members, there was something family-wise every other month. Every other month you'd have a dinner or be going down to, we used to go down to Blacksburg for the Masonic school. It was, there was something, we'd go down to Blacksburg. And something like that was the master, all the officers and their wives, and anybody else that wanted to go. You stayed in the dormitories down there, had dormitory rooms. And the incoming, you could look down there, say you knew what year you were going to be master, or if you stayed in line and the line progressed. And as it started getting close, you know who you would want for your junior deacon. And so what you would do is you would invite that brother and his wife to Blacksburg. If he'd probably want to go because he was already active in the lodge. And it gave a chance for him and his wife, for his wife in particular, to meet everybody and to see what he was getting into. So it was never a surprise to their family. They were involved in the lodge when they got down there. And once you got down there, you were involved for the rest of your career. Godfrey Ronaldo. The Godfrey Ronaldo was the treasurer and later became secretary. But when I came in, Charles Aiden Cornell, and I believe Charlie was master in 49. He was the secretary. And the two of them were just gentlemen of the first order. You know, Godfrey, like I say, Godfrey did not take his tie off after he had dinner when he got home. He'd take his coat off and they'd sit down for dinner. We've had dinner over their house on a weeknight. And he'd take his coat off, and then after dinner, he'd go take the tie off. Very formal. And Charlie Cornell was a deacon in the Baptist church, and very formal. We had, there were so many that, you know, it's hard to pick one, mainly because Godfrey was my neighbor. We had a past master, Ryan Emmett Pugh. If you go out there and look at the pictures of the past masters out there, there's one portrait in there that's terrible. It was taken from a group shot and blown up to make a head and shoulders. And that's Ryan Emmett Pugh, because he wouldn't sit for a portrait. Don't know why, but he would not sit to have his portrait taken. And Ryan Emmett Pugh was a survivor of the Bataan Death March. Let's see, Bob Swigert. Robert Clay Swire. He was the B-17 pilot during the war, flew the entire war flying B-17s and B-29s. And some of these people were just fascinating to talk to, what they had done in their lives. And that was one of the reasons our attendance was so high back then, was a lot of these were World War II veterans. But as there are not too many World War II veterans around now, and that's why the attendance is down. After any war, there's an increase in attendance in masonry. But then 40, 50 years later, they've all passed away and your attendance goes down. So I don't worry about the number of masons. People say, well, the number's decreasing. I'm not worried about that. It's a cyclical thing. It's gonna happen, and it'll happen again. Because like I say, it's difficult to think of one memory funerals and seeing the number of people that would turn out for a funeral for somebody like Godfrey. The place was packed. There were people from all over the state showed up. Meetings that we had, some of the people that we had as speakers for our meetings. The Ashlers up front. There was a man, I can't remember his name. I can't remember the exact date. I just know it was prior to me being master. So it was between 70 and 76 that he came, and he was a stonemason from the National Cathedral. And he brought as a gift for the lodge, the rough and the perfect ashlar. But he gave a talk on the two ashlars. And I want to get up in the archives and see if we possibly have a copy of that, if it was put into the minutes. Because it was so impressive about the ashlars that the rough ashlar, when you look at somebody as the equivalent of the rough ashlar, there's always some good points on it. There's some perfect points. He said, but then again, when you look at the perfect ashlar, if you look carefully, you'll find faults. And that attitude impressed me. Going to Blacksburg, taking the family down there. Robert Clay Swire, Bob Swire, the one that was the pilot, and my son. Now my son would have been 9 years old, and Bob and him sitting down in the student lounge playing pinball machine. And Bob would come back with a stack of quarters or a bag full of quarters, and my son and Bob would sit there on a pinball machine for hours. And it was just to see the family gathering of all the Masons. A memory. The lodge got together, one of our past masters, drawing a blank. Anyway, we had a member of the lodge that was an invalid. And people would go by to visit him. A couple people that knew him would go by and visit. They pointed out that the man's house was getting in bad shape outside. And so this past master, he wasn't a master at the time, one of the members said, let's go paint his house. So he made arrangements, get volunteers to go paint that house. Well, he worked at a hardware store in Alexandria. While he was talking to one of the members came by the store, and they were talking about the plans for him painting this house. And a salesman from, I don't want to give a name for a paint company, I might get the wrong one. I don't want to give wrong credit. The salesman for a paint company said, what is this all about? And they told him. And he says, well, we'll furnish the paint. So that paint manufacturer donated the paint for that house. Well, the owner of the hardware store heard it, and he came over and he donated all the equipment. Well, we went out there, and some of them had gone the weekend before and scraped and got all that ready, so we all showed up to paint. We started painting, and a truck pulls up with ladders on it. It's a painting contractor. This painting contractor had been in the hardware store and heard everything going on. So Saturday morning, he got all of his crews out working on the jobs, and he came over to the house and painted. It was showing what masonry can do. That impressed me. I think everybody remembers the third degree, of course, but to me, the first degree, being welcomed. When you go from being Mr. to being brother. When you're brought up with the right of destitution, that was extremely impressive. And I think a lot of us don't think about that. But when you stood up there and they asked you, if you think about that situation and how they explained it to you, I think that's why the first is important to me. Funerals, that's not a degree, well, not a degree, but the funeral service, the Masonic funeral service is very impressive. This falls back to memories of the time of the year. I had been Master of the Year Lodge, or I was Master at the time, I can't remember which, and we had a member die, and I'd known him. He was not, I don't think he was a member of our lodge, he was a courtesy funeral, and we did it. Dr. Glenkoff, he was a dentist in Alexandria, older than dirt. And Dr. Glenkoff, I'd met him through some other people, and we'd have lunch together every now and then. But when we had the memorial service, Alexandria-Washington Lodge did the memorial service. And it was announced that the graveside would be a family only at Arlington. He was a retired colonel, Air Force. So we understood. His wife came up to me, I'd met her, and she said, Jim, she says, Doc's, everybody called him Doc. She said, Doc's family is coming down from Pennsylvania. Now she was his second or third wife, and she'd only been married to him for like a year. She said, all of his family's coming down from Pennsylvania, and she says, I don't know anybody. She says, could you come to the graveside service? So I'll have somebody there that I know. You can't turn down something like that. So I went to the Arlington. Well, I get to the cemetery, and we go in. As I walk up, she's sitting there beside the grave. And she says, Jim, she says, could you sit with me? I said, sure. So I sat down with her. Well, they came up with the services appropriate for 06 in the Air Force. After the firing of the salute, the folding of the flag, they handed her the flag, presented the flag on behalf of the President of the United States and so forth. And then the colonel turned to me and says, we're ready for you now, Reverend. I said, what? It turned out, I don't know if it's the same or half, I've got it exactly right. Arlington will furnish a chaplain if you ask for a chaplain. Otherwise, they assume you have your own chaplain, your own minister. She assumed that there would be a chaplain there. No arrangements had been made for a minister. Hence, we're ready for you, Reverend, because I was sitting next to her in a suit. And I thought about that, and she loved the look on her face. So I got up, and I took the Masonic service and modified it slightly, because it's a beautiful service. I had a number of people came up afterwards talking about what a beautiful service it was. And read the Masonic funeral service and think about what you're reading. It's beautiful. I see Masonry growing and waning because, as I said, the membership fluctuations. But overall, I see Alexandria-Washington Lodge attendance increasing. We've got plenty of members as far as numbers go. What are we at, 295 or something like that? Somewhere around there. But they're all over the world. But we're having attendance. We have fairly good attendance now. And that's good to see. And more people are coming. More of the younger people that are coming into Lodge. You're a perfect example. They're coming now and becoming active in the Lodge. And I think with the worldwide situation, politics or the way people are doing on political things, both sides, there's one place that you can find brotherhood, and that's in the lodge. You don't have any arguments about politics or religion. Everybody has a mutual feelings of respect for each other. And I think you're going to find more people coming to lodge because of that. And I know I went on to an investigation one night, and this was a brother that was coming into the applicant. And we went to his house. He lived at his home with his family. So I don't know if you've been on any visitation committees before, but you know, we try to have the wife there or the spouse or whoever, or family. So when we got through, I was the lead on this investigation. So I turned to the woman and I said, how do you feel about this? She says, I'm against it. She says, I don't approve of it. That was a shock, you know. I said, what is it you don't approve of? She says, I don't like the way the Masons treat Catholics and Jews. And I thought, that's interesting, you know. I said, well, I turned around, Leo Aloysius Seneca, one of our past masters, was I don't know what we were at the time, but he turned around and I said, Leo, would you like to address how we treat Catholics? He says, well, I'm Catholic. He says, I'm a lay so-and-so at such and such a church. His kids went to this Catholic school, you know. He says, Masons don't treat Catholics bad. She said, oh. I said, no. I can address the subject of how they are the Jewish. I said, the Grand Master of Masons in Virginia is Dr. Seymour Jonas Levy. The Grand Master of Masons is a Jew. And the woman says, I guess I had my bad information. I said, I think so. And the young man joined the lodge, and later his father joined the lodge. So it's interesting to see how the relationship of the Masonry is with the people, if the people know. I don't wear jewelry. I don't wear rings. You know, one of the reasons I worked in construction, climbing on bridge forms and stuff, it's a good way to lose fingers. And because I didn't have jewelry, it was amazing to hear the discussions about Masonry. People would say that about Masons do this, and I would sit there and listen to some strange things that we did. But I think we're not a secret society. How can you be secret when you have the biggest building in the city sitting up on top of a hill, you know, with pictures of the members, the officers of the lodge on a wall with their names underneath of it? That's not secret. And I think as more people see what we are and what we do, we'll continue to grow. And maybe not in quantity, but in quality. That's what we want. That's the people we want, that see what we have and what we do, how we act is what brings Masons in. Well, I think you remember when you had the visitation committee come to see you. Who was on the visitation committee? That's right. I told you then that you would get out of Masonry what you put into it. If you come to lodge and you participate, it's going to be fantastic. If you don't participate and just come and become a Mason, that's still nice. But you get so much more out of it by being a part of it. And that to me is critical. Learning. I think that Masonry, how you act, is going to affect you in your business and your familial relationships everywhere. How it'll affect your work. I know that by Masonry, when I got to my job, I was sent to a public speaking course. And they had a routine they did at the beginning of it. And the fellow running the course wanted to know where I had taken the course before. And I said, I don't. I said, I'm a Mason. I said, we can stand up and talk about Masonry. Now, it's somewhat embarrassing to me. I've gotten to where some of these things now, I get very emotional thinking about these things now. But being able to stand up in front of everybody and talk. But one thing you know about talking here, everybody's on your side. People that we had a past master would sit there as the chaplain, Edward John Gondella. Do the senior deacons now have to remember all the names of the past masters? Okay, this was a part of the tradition at the time that you would be able to introduce every past master by his full name. And the gallery of past masters used to be in the anteroom there on the wall. And each evening when I would come up to a call meeting or a school or something like that, I'd sit down there and go, they would say Edward J. Gondella, but I'd say Edward John Gondella. You got to know all the names. And I did that until I could get them all. And I was checking myself out with them one night. And I said, I know him, I don't know him. And one of the brother looked at me and he said, Jim, the black frames are already dead. That's why you don't know him. I was a little slow. I never noticed. They used to have gold frames on all the living past masters, black frames on the ones that had passed. And I'm just looking at the picture and the name, not paying attention to the frames. But the friendship of Lodge, don't hesitate to take a part. You're going to make mistakes. And as I said, Ed Gondella there was the chaplain. And I would be sitting in the east before I was master. And I would be giving my part, and all of a sudden Ed would turn around and look up at me, and I thought, oh heavens, I've done it. I've made a mistake. And I'd go ahead and finish up. After Lodge, I'd come over, I'd say, Ed, what mistake did I make? What was it? He says, you make mistakes. He was just having fun. And it was just, there was such a closeness of everybody in the lodge. And that's what I loved it. When you come into lodge, each night when you come to lodge, shake the hand of every brother in the lodge. Say hello to every brother. Particularly when you're master. I mean, if you miss a few during, coming along, but while you're master, make sure that you say hello to every brother in the lodge. Now, just within the last couple of years, I had, a brother came up here to get a 50-year pin or something, and he was talking about the lodge, and he said, one thing I remember about you, he said, you said hello to me every night that I came to lodge. It won't be forgotten. That's an important one, I think. The other thing is, learn about everything in the lodge to tell the brothers. This picture up here. When I came to lodge, I went into the archives committee. In the archives committee, one of the things to discuss, like the first meeting of the archives committee I went to, was they were trying to clean up. And there was a big picture frame in the, just outside the master's office that had a picture on, had a canvas on it that was black, dark brown to black. You couldn't make out a picture or anything on it. It was, looked like somebody taking a knife down the bottom corner and put a half-moon cut in it. It had a cut in it. And it was just there. And they said, well, to save the frame, but we ought to just get rid of that. And the archives committee said, well, before we get rid of it, let's find out for sure what it is. So we called the Corcoran Gallery, and they sent somebody over and looked at it and carefully and knowing what they were doing. And as I said, they almost had a hemorrhage when they heard we were going to throw it out. And they said we should get it cleaned and restored. So we got it cleaned and restored. And that picture was by John Chapman. And it turned out that he had presented it to the lodge. And the date is on there. I can't remember the date. I think it was like 1832 or 35 or something like that. Anyway, when we saw the date, we went to look it up. There's nothing in the minutes about it. And somebody found it like 4 or 5 years before that it was given to the lodge. And the reason we guess was when he painted that picture for the lodge, he was an unknown artist. But later, he's the one that did the christening of Pocahontas that you see in the Capitol. And John Chapman became a famous portrait painter. And I think he came back and signed it. But that came so close to being thrown out in the trash. Things like that. The story of the Ashlers. where they came from, the Washington Cathedral. I don't want to mention it, from Washington Cathedral, some of the stones from over there. When you're doing your parts in lodge, as a junior deacon, when you do your part, speak slowly and distinctly, as if when you're talking about what the junior deacon does. Explain it to that fellow in the northeast corner of the lodge. That's what you're doing. You're explaining it to him. And if you take each part of it as a lecture, you're giving a lecture. That way, you speak close, distinctly, and you're teaching. And it makes you think about what you're saying. I think the worst thing I've ever heard in any lodge, I heard a guy give a Master Mason's lecture one time and took great pride, and he did it in only so many minutes. The candidate got nothing out of that. So ritual is not meant to waste time. It's meant to teach. And I think that's what you need. Think of it that way. Find yourself a past master that you know. Talk to any of them. But periodically ask him for any questions you have, any advice you need. Now, anything you ask me, if you come up and say that I'm thinking about doing this, okay. If you ask me, do I think you should do it? I don't think it'll work. But I'm not going to tell you not to, because you're the master. At that time, you're the master. And it's your decision. And as a past master, I am past. It's not my job to do anything, to tell you what to do. That's why I sit in the northeast corner. And but take the advice, look around and see the book they're passing around with the different jobs. That should be updated annually. I mean, it's a fantastic idea, but it should be updated annually. Otherwise, as you finish your current position, you should make some notes to add into it. Now today with cut and paste, there's no reason we can't do that. And I think that makes a big difference. We used to almost have something like that, particularly the senior deacon, the senior deacon. He had a booklet that showed what he had to do. And in there, your schedule for what was going to be happening. January the 2nd, I'll never forget that, January the 2nd, 7 a.m., call the National Park Service and reserve Fort Hunt Park for the picnic. The area. 7 o'clock on the morning of the 2nd. And what you did, you started dialing the number until it answered. Because if you waited to 9 o'clock to do it, it was probably already going to be taken. But that was the thing, the booklet was there. Where you can buy the green beans we're going to serve for meals, stuff like that. This booklet, it makes it so much easier for the next person coming along, and it creates a relationship. Attend lodge or your own lodge like you do. So I can't tell you how to do something there. But when you meet other people from other lodges, invite them to our lodge. And if you ever hear of a lodge having problems on a degree night, go over there and give them a hand. They've come over and helped us. When Mike took over, what was that, 17, 19, 18? Yeah. When he came back in, when we had a degree night, we got help from other lodges. They came in here to help. We had people that drove up from Fredericksburg to participate. Andrew Jackson. That makes a difference. And I think you get a lot out of that. But I'm inviting both of you this summer, towards the end of summer. William L. Elkins Lodge is having their first memorial service at the grave of William L. Elkins, based on the fact what they used to see down here when they came all the time. And I've been invited up there and been told to invite everybody up there. Now that's a case of you should go, go up there. It'll be a Saturday. Spend the Saturday, they'll have a dinner or something that night, spend the night and then come home the next day. It's great. This lodge has got so many traditions that were lost over that last 10 years of the Elkins Lodge. You know about the Goulian Fund? Have you ever heard of the Goulian Fund? Goulian was a member of Elkins Lodge, and he came down here and he thought it was great. He thought it was great that they came down. And he thought that we went up there. So Goulian left a chunk of money in his will, or made I don't know if it was in his will or given to us outright, but he gave a substantial amount of money to Alexandria-Washington Lodge and to Elkins Lodge to perpetuate the visits between the lodges. Now, there was enough money in the Goulian Fund that when we got ready to go up, they would send us 5 tickets for 5 couples. We'd send them tickets for 5 hours. And then the master, that was the exchange. But also the master would sit down there, maybe you weren't an officer yet, but you were active in the lodge. He'd say to you, would you like to go to Elkins Lodge with us for their ladies' night? The lodge would furnish you the ticket. The lodge would pay for the motel room. All of this came out of the Goulian Fund. The Goulian Fund was big enough that the interest on it increased the net every year. We didn't even spend all of the money coming in from it. Sometime during that 10-year period, they dumped that into the general fund. I don't like that. That thing, Ralph Harold Cumbie, past master of the lodge, left a large endowment to the lodge. And it was listed for education in the care of animals. That's what he wanted done with it. But he didn't want us to use it for education or the care of animals. That was his 2 things. And it's kind of, they're still calling it the Cumbie Fund, but it's kind of mixed in with everything now. And I think we need to, I've told the masters each year, and I'll tell you, when something comes up, if it's education-wise, specify that it come out of the Cumbie Fund. For one reason, it's not affecting your bottom line anywhere, but it is honoring Harold Ralph Cumbie. And I think that's important.